Well, again, everybody, welcome to the IT SMB meetup, January 14th. My name is Eric Beckman, founder and CEO of Beckman Technology Projects, LLC. Our guest tonight is Renee Schmidt, CEO of the other firm, SheBites.com. Yes, thank you. I knew that was there. And so tonight we're just going to be going over some, gaining some insights from Renee and her experience in the tech sector. And with that, I'd like to start by asking you, what's one characteristic that you believe every leader as it relates to IT should possess? And what is one of the biggest mistakes that you often see leaders making that they could probably correct?
And so before I answer the question, I just want everyone to know I want this to be as interactive as possible, and it's a pretty small group, so feel free to kind of jump in and ask a question if it relates to what we're talking about. I know we'll have more time for Q&A, but it just might be more fun. But to answer the question, I think as far as leadership goes, the thing that I see most frequently when I consult to different companies, and typically this happens in larger companies, people will get brought in for a leadership role at a very high level, and with that comes a lot of ego, and there's also a fear of looking like you don't know, or that you're not sure, or that you're gonna that you're not fit for the job. And the truth is that you, as a leader, need some kind of runway, and I'm not gonna say how many days that is. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 45 days, it could be something, but people need to get acclimated with the environment that they're in. And one of the ways to do that is to ask a lot of questions, and I think leaders should be humble enough to assume that they don't know and ask questions, and not just of other senior managers who report to them, but get in the weeds and ask people at a more junior level, well, what do you think about this organization? What would you change? I think that the junior people, just by virtue of having not been there for a very long time, are not polluted by the environment and the bureaucracy of it, and will probably be able to give a much more objective and honest feedback on what the real problems are. And before a leader's really truthfully collected all of the information on the state of the organization and their job, I don't think they can really begin to be a leader.
And would you say that's the biggest challenge that leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises are facing today?
Well, no. I think that's not a challenge that is across the board. I think that's a personal challenge that a leader needs to overcome. But as it relates to the challenges within an organization, whether it's because you're a service provider coming in, or if you're working within a large organization, there's just so much security now, and there's so much governance now that it's hard to lead when you have to deal with so much red tape. And I think that's the bigger challenge. But then actually, you can't just walk into an environment and get everybody on board. There's so many things that you need to get past, and I think all of the hierarchy and governance and you're shaking your head, Deepak, because you work as a management consultant with firms, and so you understand, even if you have these great ideas, there's so many levels of approval and authority and buy-in that you need to get to push anything forward.
Right. So perhaps with that in mind, for somebody who is about to assume a leadership role for the first time at a small or medium-sized business, what kind of advice would you offer that type of person, that person undertaking a leadership role for the first time?
Small and medium-sized?
Small to medium-sized businesses is typically between anywhere from 1 to 500 employees.
Okay.
Some people define as 350.
But oftentimes those small and mid-sized businesses are working with other companies. So as I was giving the example for myself personally, I'm a small business and I work with large enterprises and even mid-sized enterprises. If they're in financial services, if they're regulated, if it's a hedge fund, it's subject to a lot of regulation. Even a medical office is subject to a lot of of different types of regulations. So it's not limited just to the size of the organization, and also sometimes it could be just who you're facing off to with your clients or your stakeholders. That could be the consideration.
Not to mention the scenario where, you know, a junior level person may be promoted to a management position as a company grows from 20 people to 100 people or more.
Yeah.
You know, where, you know, they may be facing those kinds of inertia effects that you described.
Totally.
Yeah.
I've seen people spend a year going down a strategic path, and you know, there's a whole team of people involved in that strategy, but they haven't clearly defined what the problem is. And so I think, you know, and there's a quote by Albert Einstein which I love: when he has a new challenge, he spends and suppose he has an hour to solve it, he spends 55 minutes framing the question and 5 minutes answering it. And I think it's like the most valuable quote that or one of the most valuable quotes that I've heard. I also think, and it comes back to ego and being humble, where are you coming from as a leader? So if I was going to give advice to somebody who was going into a leadership position, it's, you know, why do you want to be excellent? Is it because you want to bring excellence and add value and be sharing and helping to the client and to the people that you work with every single day? Or is it because you want to be excellent so that you could put like a check next to I'm amazing and you know, like I'm like totally it, and I delivered this and I did that and I'm so cool.
Yeah.
People will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I think that, you know, leaders should always be considerate of the place that they're coming from, because essentially the seed level of wherever our consciousness is, it's like a tree. If you plant a seed into soil and the whole thing is, you know, corrupt and it's a bad seed, you're gonna grow a bad tree. But if you come from a place of really wanting to help and share, and it not being about me and what I want and what I'm gonna get, then you really build something that can weather time.
Now, what about you personally? Like, how do you continue to grow and develop as a leader? Like, what are the things that you focus on?
Well, obviously a lot of what I just shared, it's something that I think a lot about. I also like to read a lot, which is good to a point, because I think that there's so much information out there that it can become largely unproductive to sit and read all day, because then you're just taking in information. I think we need to also unplug and disconnect and take some time to look inside and make sense of all the things that we already know, because we know so much. But also I think it's always important for me to do things that make me uncomfortable and to get outside my comfort zone. So if there's anything that like I know would make me cringe or something I really don't want to do, it's probably a really good indication that it's something that I should do and invest energy into. And I find that like whenever I get into that space of discomfort, it's when I see the most amazing miracles happen to me and amazing opportunities come to me. I think it's important to always like push beyond where we're at and try to grow and change and transform more and more.
Great, thank you. You know, now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and return back toward one of our favorite questions here at ITSMB, which is, you know, we're always looking for ways to improve the way that IT can be, that information technology can be viewed within an organization. As you've probably experienced, IT is typically viewed as a cost center. And how do you think an IT department or leadership within information technology and a department at an enterprise might do a better job of demonstrating to upper management its value?
It's a good question. So generally speaking, unless a company's core business is technology, then technology is a cost center. It has to be, because it's not the core business of the company. And I found that typically when IT is a cost center, a lot of it is based, fortunately or unfortunately, around sentiment. So the business feels a certain way about their technology, and when they're making a lot of money, they don't necessarily care that IT is 20 or 30% more expensive than whatever the industry benchmark is. They're fine to pay it because they're making a lot of money, and their perception is that technology is facilitating that and helping them, and even though it costs more than the competition, we're also kicking ass and we're doing better than the competition, so who cares? When things are not doing so well, then everyone's looking for where we can cut the bottom line, how can we make IT less expensive. So I think one key thing is always sentiment. The business needs to feel like IT is doing a good job. Not that IT shouldn't be doing a good job, they should be, but it's really important to communicate back to the business all of the things that you're doing to support their initiatives. And so strategically, at the very top level of the technology organization, they need to be really in sync with what the business is trying to accomplish. And that also comes with asking a lot of questions. So you still have to humble yourself even before your stakeholders on the business side, and ask them, what are you really trying to accomplish? What is it that's keeping you up at night? What can we as a technology organization do to facilitate your objectives for the year? And the more you can communicate back to the business that you're doing X, Y, and Z, and it's addressing A, B, and C, and really tie back your initiatives in a written way that you're addressing the real issues, that's what's going to get sentiment in the right place, and it's also going to make sure that the objectives are really aligned to what the company is trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great question. I think it depends on how expensive the IT organization is, and also you don't want to throw good money after bad money. So people will also think about that. I mean, if you have a leadership team in your IT organization that's 30% more expensive than your competitors, and now they're promising you that if we do all of these cool, amazing things, we can re-architect everything, and we're going to make you more productive and more efficient, we'll have this amazing new platform. I think it's great, but there really needs to be a strong business case for that, and you also have to look at who is the team that's leading that effort. And when I say business case, there really needs to be a value proposition and a return on the investment to really prove that spending more money is going to get us to the right path, but separately from that you have the right team to lead you there. That's why in large companies, typically, you see every 3 years, a new regime takes over. And it's because there was some kind of breakdown, there was some kind of failure, and so the guy from this large company in finance goes to that large company in finance, and kind of the cycle just repeats itself.
Yeah. What about, we talked about how an IT department can more effectively demonstrate its value to upper management. Now, how important do you think it is for those same IT executives to provide marketing and PR for the products and services that they're delivering? That is, to kind of champion their projects, themselves, with their balance sheets in their hands, so to speak,
I think it's really important. As companies become larger, they will have portfolios of products that on the surface all sound like they do the same thing, whereas they actually do very different things. And it's really important for the technology organization to be able to differentiate the investments that they're making and the products that they have, and for people on the business side to be able to understand what's available to them, because most of the time it's not very well communicated what kind of tools are available to the organization. So I wanna answer your question in the least complicated way, but at one of the clients that I worked at, it was a large enterprise with over 50,000 employees. There was a technology that was procured. It's called Jive, and it's a technology that lets employees within a social network that resides within the confines of the business. So like it's just meant for employees to do social networking amongst themselves. So just to take a step back, the company inherited Jive and stood it up because from a technical perspective, that's pretty easy for technologists to do. But then they had this product that nobody knew how to use, and nobody knew what it was for. And there's so much hype about social networking in the business place and how it can generate so much value. But again, nobody actually knew how to draw that value out of the product. So what I did is as part of a team, and again, like to get us to this place, we had to create a business case for it and get a lot of buy-in. But ultimately, we created a team within this large organization that was a consulting group that worked with any business area in the firm that had an interest or like a perceived use case for this social platform. So one example of it is, when you need support for your iPhone, you don't call Apple usually. I mean, you could, but most people go to the Apple support forums. A large company with 60,000 people has like similar support issues, whether like it's on the technical side or an operations side. So using a social network, you could stand up a use case like that where instead of 130,000 calls coming into the call center every single month, people are just going to the support forum and the community is answering other people's questions, and thereby people are building a reputation for themselves, and all of that is searchable. So how do you get something like that stood up? Like that's something that needs business buy-in, and technologists don't have necessarily the business sense to create or frame the value proposition of launching something like that. And that's where my team came in, and we looked at the firm and tried to identify many different use cases for this technology, and that was just one of them, but there's many others. It was a financial services firm, but it could have been anything. It could have been a major retailer or a manufacturer. When you get to that kind of scale, you have the same challenges in terms of communication, collaboration across the board, and people are spending a lot of time and money looking for information, looking for an answer, looking for a subject matter expert person with the answer. So if there's a way to kind of bubble that up, then it can be hugely valuable.
Now, with that example in mind, can you give an example, like another example of some sort of impact that social networking in general has had toward your organization?
Yes. So for me personally, I've invested a lot of time into personal branding, and a lot of that is done through social networking. And I would say anybody who is an entrepreneur or a business owner could definitely benefit from that. But also, even if you work for a large company, but you have like a niche expertise, I think it's valuable to use LinkedIn and share information that's relevant to the type of work that you do, so that people, I call it haunting someone's periphery, but if you're constantly talking, like Craig is an accountant, and he's constantly sharing out useful things for the clients that he works with. It doesn't have to be accounting related, because people might not want to read that, no offense, Craig.
Boring.
But let's say you like work with a specific vertical, and maybe if you're an accountant to entrepreneurs, share articles that entrepreneurs would find useful, so that the next time somebody is looking for an accountant, they're going to think of you because you've been haunting their periphery for like the last 8 months. So I think it's really important to create a digital footprint. I've invested a lot of time into it. It doesn't end, of course, at just like social networking. I think you have to meet people be available to people, take meetings, but it can be incredibly valuable if you are clear on what your objectives are. Technology is just a vehicle, so if you know how to use it, it can really open a lot of doors.
Now, what about on the, let's say the 3 to 5 year horizon, as far as technology and IT in general is concerned? What do you see as being the major factors or emerging technologies or effects that might be coming out over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the coolest thing that I'm seeing is machine learning and the different ways that it's getting used. Generally, we spend a lot of time doing strategic thinking, critical thinking about just about everything in our lives, and machines are going to start to use data to do that for us, and it's going to be in a much more personal way. So, even I'll give you an example. It's called small data, but you might look at since we're doing everything so digitally, we leave like a big footprint behind, and Google knows a lot about us, more than we know about ourselves, but we are going to have like access to that information in the short term. So if digitally some machine knows everything that I've eaten because I bought it on Amazon Prime and I bought it on Fresh Direct, and my calendar knows everything that I'm doing, and Facebook knows who I'm talking to, and email knows the last time I called my mom, based on comparing my small data to like a much wider set of large data, Google, or not Google, or whatever this machine is, will be able to like recommend to me things that I might want to do, like sleep more, or drink more water, or make better food choices. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that, like both on a personal level and also like in many different verticals. Like I'm working with a company now that takes all of your email communications, and the machine learns who you communicate with and who you respond back to very quickly versus who you don't respond to at all, or the subjects that you're talking about frequently. And as it learns over time, it starts to prioritize your mailbox for you. And it could save somebody a tremendous amount of time. If you take that into a business setting, then you can really measure value, because you can look at the platform and say, how much did this user spend on day one of like using this new like machine learning interface, and how much time did they spend on email on day 30? And you can quantify that there is a change. But it gets even more smart than that, because the machines are even able to look at the content of the email, and based on it recommend to you what your next best action should be. So for example, somebody wrote me an email and it says something about we should set up a call at 2 p.m. and invite George. So there's going to be a little icon which would say, do you want to set up a meeting at 2 p.m. and invite George? Now, I don't have to think about what just happened here, just press a button. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that, like in an infinite amount of verticals, and it's just going to be a lot. We're not going to have to think. Well, they use it to share information that you can't put out externally. So it's a way for employees to collaborate amongst themselves on work that they're doing, which is usually confidential and can't leave the confines of the business.
It's like an intranet.
It's like an intranet, like a social intranet.
Yeah.
And
every use case is so different, but yes, there's a lot of business areas that saw success where you can actually measure how much call volume you've deflected using that example that I gave you guys. But in other areas, it could be that you're helping a sales team collaborate better, and now that sales team is closing more business because things are surfacing up more quickly and information's more readily available. So it really it depends on what objective you're using the technology for. It's only as good as what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah.
So,
And another example of that with the small data that I heard on a tech talk, it was the example that was given was this woman's father who, started to behave a little bit awkward, but nobody really noticed it in the family for, 3 weeks. And then ultimately, I think he had a stroke, and then he passed away 3 weeks later. And because people don't talk to him every second of every single day, there was no way to know that. But digitally, he was also behaving very differently because he wasn't sending the emails that he normally sends, and he wasn't shopping the way that he normally shops. And if there was this small data, if people had access to this information, he could have been diagnosed as behaving very different than how he normally behaves versus, unfortunately he passed away and nobody knew until after the fact. But we have so much data that we leave behind every single day that's so valuable and could be benchmarked against a larger data set, not only our own data, but against other people's data. And from that, you can infer so many things. But maybe we would be less upset about our data being out there if we could use it. Like if it was useful to us, because it's out there now, but we can't use it. So I know it sounds so sci-fi, but I believe that that's actually where things are headed.
Well, that sounds like an algorithm problem.
yeah.
I do believe that the space between cause and effect is shrinking rapidly, and it's something that I give thought to, even when you work with a large company, and if that large company, I don't know, let's say their core business is trading, and they're fighting for these milliseconds, right? The data is so important. People want to, be closer to the backbone of the internet so that they could trade faster. And it's kind of to what end, at what point?
To make money.
Right, but at what point can you get to a point where everything is instantaneous? And what's also interesting about that is how it's changing the way that our workforce is hired, essentially, because ultimately a college education is really not that valuable if a lot of what you've learned is just history, because everything could kind of get Googled. So if you're really smart and you can absorb information really well, you can become a subject matter on expert on something relatively quickly. So what's the point of going and spending 4 years and $200,000 on a college education if
Well, if that's all you learn, it would be a waste. But hopefully you really learn how to think.
I'm just kind of curious as to whether or not you've developed any techniques or what have you for, delivering your solutions, especially from an IT perspective, to the clients that you work with, as far as improving the efficacy of the solutions that you craft.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Whether or not you are in the process of developing or implementing ways to improve the services that you offer your clients.
Well, the nature of consulting, it's very individuated. It's usually, I'm asked to come in when there's a really complex problem that needs solving, and they're always so unique and so different. So, to some extent, I think consulting will be around for a really long time because you'll need a consultant to help frame a framework for a really smart machine, kind of take over from there. But yeah, so I would say for what I do, it's really important, to your point, to be really good at communicating and to be able to express what the value is and in what I offer, and also to ask a lot of questions and listen to what people need. Because, if I just walk in guns blazing and say, I'm all of these things and I can do all of this for you, people, they don't respond to that well. Usually they want you to, I don't even want to say that it's what they want, but if you come in and you ask a lot of questions and you try to understand where the person is coming from, not only will you make the other person feel comfortable, but it shows like a certain level of, I don't even know what the right word is, but it reflects like a maturity, I guess, and then people are more inclined to trust you, even, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Maybe like an attentiveness and a sensitivity to their individual needs.
Yeah, I mean, I've come to a client and I said, look, a lot of what you're saying doesn't really make sense right now, and it was the truth. It didn't make sense, but I feel like can really add a lot of value, and if I spend time digging into what the real issues are here, I'll be able to help you. So if you hire me, you're hiring me so you could use my brain for half a year. And the person was so confident in what I said, because it was the truth, that they gave me the engagement, even though we didn't like have a very clearly defined scope of work. And thankfully it went off really well, and it was like a leap of faith on their part, but it worked out. But to your point, I think communication is so important, and writing abilities are so important, and it's something that everyone at every level should invest in, because with even people who are technologists, with the way that things are changing, the jobs that we have now are going to be so different than what we have 10 years from now. And if we can't sell ourselves and explain what we bring to the table, then it's going to come back to bite us.
Great. Do you have any other questions? Yeah.
It's very true. And it's, it's telling of what's happening in the world right now from, the perspective of war and terror. It just shows like a lack of humanity and unity. It's not a lack of being able to communicate or, we have all of these unifying technologies, and it's not helping people to be more compassionate. It's really about how we show up for other people, and where our intention is, and are we giving human dignity, and are we really trying to help? It's true, and when you remove the space between cause and effect, on one hand, if you're doing things that are positive, then you can get like instant feedback on that, or you can get instant gratification on something. Like, I want this thing, I can manifest it in an hour. But on the other hand, if you're using these tools for negativity, then if you're a politician, you're married, and you're having like you're sending selfies to your mistress or whatever, that can also show up on Twitter in an hour. So people can benefit from these tools so they get the instant feedback, but also the instant feedback could be very, very painful in a way that would have never been evident in the past.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Renee, for coming and speaking with us this evening. Renee Schmidt, SheSquad, SheBites.com. Thank you, everybody.